Hey everyone, my name is Dogly, and I want to be the very best Kazuha player, like no one ever was. It will be a very long journey, but Kazuha is the first character that has really inspired me to try to be a better Genshin player, so it's a journey that I'm excited to take part in. This video will serve as a guide for my thoughts on Kazuha's build options, and I will showcase him in action later on in the video. So without further ado, let's jump into it. The first build for Kazuha is the Pure EM Support build. The nuts and bolts for a Pure EM build is to give Kazuha as much Elemental Mastery main stat as possible on a Viridescent artifact set to increase his swirl damage. You would aim for around 900 to 1100 Elemental Mastery. Some players who have been able to farm enough artifacts might also choose to get some energy recharge substats on their artifacts to help charge his ultimate as much as possible while keeping him on the field for only short periods of time. One of the main selling points with a pure EM build is that his swirl damage is only based on your level and your elemental mastery, meaning you can save resin by not leveling up talents or farming for amazing artifacts. The only other build that's really mentioned commonly is the main and sub DPS build, which uses crit rate and crit damage over elemental mastery. This build typically uses an Anemo damage goblet, a crit circlet, and attack percent sands. For DPS Kazuha, the best in-slot weapons is roughly a tie between Freedom Sworn and Jade Cutter, with Black Sword, Black Cliff, and Iron Sting being good 4-star options. A 4-piece Viridescent set is still the way to go for his artifact, since it provides resistant shredding that will improve your overall damage. Bolide has some use if you're running a Kazuha that hits for consistent infused damage with his normal attacks, so we'll give that an honorable mention, but most of the time Viridescent is the way to go. All of the Kazuha build guides that I've seen are stuck between these two polarities of pure EM support and pure offensive Kazuha. But I'm really left wondering why this is the case. Why isn't a mixed Kazuha build talked about more? A lot of stats in Genshin Impact have what we call diminishing returns, which essentially means that if you put too much investment into one stat, that extra investment will start to flatten out and not give you the same damage potential. I won't go too in depth into it, but basically it becomes a ratio of your attack percent to your crit damage, where you want to try to find a point with maximum damage output. In practice, for most DPS characters, this maximized sweet spot means that you have a little bit of attack percent substats, but most of your substats are going to crit damage, of course after assuming that you've locked down enough for crit rate. I'll give you a link in the description to a forum post that I found that explains this in much more depth if you're interested in reading the finer details. Okay, so that's how it is for attack and crit damage. However, elemental mastery is sort of its own thing altogether, since the damage gains for elemental reactions is not a linear path even when you graph it as a single stat. 100 points of EM will give you different percents of elemental reaction damage, but 200 points of elemental mastery will not give you double the damage gains that you get at 100 EM. Since this is a Kazuha video and his primary reaction is swirl, I recorded a lot of elemental mastery numbers and their corresponding extra swirl damage and graphed the results, which as you can see shows a small but stable curve showing diminishing returns, where the value of each EM point gets smaller the more EM you have invested. Kazuha's kit has a lot of opportunity for swirling, so swirl damage will always be a part of your damage output, and swirl damage will never crit or be impacted by Kazuha's attack stat. Kazuha also has respectable skill damage and elemental bonus damage with his E and his ult, and these hits can crit and are impacted by his attack stat. So how do you maximize Kazuha and get the best of both worlds? Swirl damage is dependent on so many factors, such as the number of enemies present and whether Kazuha will cause elemental reactions while swirling, or how his swirls will interact with elements that opponents have as well. So the answer is quite situational depending on Kazuha's teammates and the opponents you're facing. However, swirling has proven to be an incredibly effective way to destroy enemy shields, something that raw attack and crit power can't do. ultimately, on my quest to become the best Kazuha user in all of Teyvat, I think a mixed build just has some irresistible qualities that make me want to continue playing and testing it out. Swirl shield shredding will always be a thing, so if you're going to be swirling that much near shielded enemies, why wouldn't you also want to be dealing damage next to unshielded enemies in the same area? We can see this in Abyss 12-3, where the Herald or Lectern start unshielded, but are next to shielded Abyss mages. But if you have too much EM, then you'll definitely be getting these noticeable diminishing returns in swirl damage. I think a mixed build just has the potential to be the best of both worlds. Currently, I'm running 617 EM for a 377% swirl boost, and about 44% crit rate and 163% crit damage. Ideally, I'd really like to get more crit rate, but I can boost this up to 59% crit rate just by putting Kazuha on a team with Cryo Resonance. I'm running EM on my Sands, Anemo damage on my Goblet, and crit damage on my Circlet. I do think attack percent on Sands is viable as well, as long as you can get lots of EM substat to make up for it, but I prefer Elemental Mastery myself. My Circlet itself is a huge reason why I wanted to try out a mixed build, since it rolled heavily into Elemental Mastery. When I first rolled it, I was really struggling to find a character that would want that much crit damage and Elemental Mastery on a single artifact, but when Kazuha came around, I finally had a reason to try it out. And I think that itself is just a huge point in favor of using mixed Kazuha. Very often there are artifacts for DPS characters and artifacts for support characters that only benefit from very specific stats, which makes good artifacts harder to farm. Weird artifact rolls like getting 10% crit rate and 60 EM can actually be really good on Kazuha, and as a result he has more opportunities to maximize his substats since he's looking for a wider variety of substats. If I were to give advice to everyone else who's trying to build a mixed Kazuha, I would say that if you're in the end game, try to get between 400 and 700 Elemental Mastery, over 40 crit rate, and over 100% crit damage. These are a little bit of arbitrary benchmarks, but I think having much less than 400 Elemental Mastery means that your swirl damage will be a little bit low, and if you have more than 700, then you're probably lacking in crit rate and crit damage. So these are just loose parameters that I decided to go for this video. Again though, actually finding the perfect Kazuha balance between offense and Elemental Mastery is super situational depending on what enemy he is fighting. But I think Kazuha is one of the most fun and versatile characters that MiHoYo has made, and I think trying out a mixed build can show this versatility as well. Because mixed Kazuha is so flexible, I tend to play him as a sub DPS or even a co-DPS, since he can help his teammates but still can do a lot of damage on his own right, and he gets a sustained field presence starting at C1. If you're also running a mixed Kazuha, please comment down below and tell me all about your stats and what you think works best for you. If you'd like to state your case for why a non-mixed build is best, please do so as well. I look forward to hearing from all of you, and I hope we can learn from each other and try to be the best Kazuha players that we can be. With that, I want to end the video with a few domains and Abyss runs, which will feature a few slightly different team compositions. These were recorded off the cuff with me just trying to do normal gameplay instead of going for big damage showcases, and Kazuha still was able to do some impressive things. Of note, I've been having fun with Kazuha, Ganyu, and Chungyun. Ganyu gives 20% cryo damage bonus to her teammates inside her ultimate, which also increases Kazuha's cryo swirls, and Chungyun gives 8% movement speed bonus to melee characters in his circle, but more importantly at C2 he reduces the skill cooldown of his teammates in his circle, which further enhances Kazuha's C1 if you have it. Additionally, Mona's C1 can really help a Permafreeze team with Kazuha since it extends freeze and boosts Hydro Swirls. Of course, Bennett is a mad lad and can help give you Vaporize or melt damage as well. Sucrose's elemental transfer might be better for huge melt numbers compared to Kazuha, but I do think Kazuha has better shield breaking powers than Sucrose, and overall his attacks have greater precision and he can hit his targets a lot easier. So Kazuha does have some merit over Sucrose on melt teams as well. Anyway, sit back and watch the rest, and if you found any of this content helpful, please give a like.
to the wind.